Welcome to the Cinema Australia podcast with Matthew Eels.
Bro, I think this could be the one.
Excuse me, what song is that?
It's not finished yet.
Do you have a studio?
Yeah, you're looking at it.
What inspired you to write such a beautiful song?
My father, he lost his job, then we lost our house. I'm gonna change things, Ella. I have to.
I believe you. Your music is amazing, Izak.
Are you gonna let me hear one of your songs yet? No one's gonna hear you up here.
Okay. And you still visit me in my dreams.
Why have you been hiding that? I've got chills. We could write one together.
And perform to crowds of thousands.
Why not?
See your face hanging on.
Where are you going?
Do you ever stop being a cop?
You're going to fail if you keep this up. Is that what you want?
Feeling.
Stay away from my daughter.
Don't worry about her coming here anymore. She's not welcome.
And now all this. What's going on, Izak?
What are you doing, man?
Nothing. That's the point. We need the music to try and make it out.
You can't give up now. I know we can do this. You still visit me in my dreams.
It's not too late to change things.
In my dreams. I just want to play music with you.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Yo, what's up, everyone?
In my dreams. Izak, it's always good to see ya.
That's the trailer for Under Streetlights. Hello and welcome to the Cinema Australia podcast. My name is Matthew Eels. In this episode, I'm joined by Under Streetlights writer, director and co-producer Danielle Loy to discuss this incredibly moving musical drama. This film is the exact reason why you shouldn't sleep on independently made Australian films. Quite often, they're far better than a lot of the mainstream Australian films being made. Under Streetlights deserves all the attention that it gets. Inspired by true events, Under Streetlights follows two young artists, Izak, played by Jacob Harvey, and Ella, played by Madison Hull, from vastly different worlds who collide through their shared passion for music, forging an unexpected bond that defies cultural barriers and fuels their fight to rise above their struggles. Danielle Loy is an award-winning filmmaker and lawyer from Alice Springs. Her documentary film Bush Law was awarded Best Documentary at the Melbourne International Film Festival by screen critic veteran Margaret Pomeranz. Danielle has spent her working life dedicated to bridging chasms of misunderstandings between Indigenous and non-Indigenous legal systems, and working in a plethora of roles in films and TV shows made in Central Australia. I can't thank Danielle enough for sharing her personal stories that led to and inspired the making of Under Streetlights. This was an interview that I won't forget anytime soon. Under Streetlights will release nationally in select cinemas from December 12 via Screen Inc. Anyway, enjoy. Danielle Loy, thank you for joining the Cinema Australia podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. I'm currently making my way through this year's Australian films in consideration for actor nominations, and I usually watch most of those actor TV films on my computer, but I had a feeling that I needed to watch Under Streetlights on a much bigger screen, and I was right. This film hit me like a ton of bricks, such as its emotional impact, especially when that emotion is presented through song. It's a moving film worthy of the biggest and loudest screen possible, in my opinion, so congratulations on this film, Danielle. You should be very happy with how it's turned out.
Thank you so much. And I think what you just said hits the nail on the head as to why we're currently on the journey that we're on.
Yeah. And you're currently travelling with the film for a series of preview screenings. How's that experience been so far?
Well, that's exactly why we're doing it, because of what you just said, because we believe that the biggest impact the film's going to have is not only being in a cinema so that you can have the surround sound and the visuals, incredible visuals of the Central Australian landscape, and the surround sound of the soundtrack with all original music, but it's also about what happens after the movie, us all being in the room together, having been through that experience together. And that's why we're traveling around the country, because, you know, we know these days people want to lie in their bedrooms and watch something on a streaming platform, but this is a film that needs to be shared. This is a film that needs to be a human experience, exploring common ground amongst every person in that room. And it's the only film that I've ever seen actually do that. There's a lot of films that have a target profile that can directly relate, and then they have empathizers and sympathizers. But this is a film that every single person in the room, no matter whether you're young or old, or what your demographic is, what your background is culturally or religious-wise, you will connect to this film personally. And when you look around the cinema and you see that, it's the most incredible feeling for everyone in the room.
Yeah, I bet. How are people responding once the film's finished? What are they saying to you personally?
People are crying, they're shaking. They are quite overwhelmed is probably the most apt word that I can use to categorize every response, even though we're quite diverse. It's overwhelmed. People they didn't anticipate. I think because, you know, you touched on when we first began speaking, you touched on Australian films and the media ignoring them. And so the bar is quite low for this film, and the bar is quite low because it's an Australian film, but also because we're a bunch of nobodies from the middle of nowhere. And we went and did something that people said couldn't be done. We went and did something against all the rules. And then we came out the other side. And so people come, and I don't think they expect much lower than the bar being on the ground. And they come in support, or they come out of intrigue, or maybe they come, you know, so that they can criticize it even. Potentially, you know, but they all feel the same way. I mean, we haven't had any person walk out of a screening and give us anything other than an overwhelmed reaction. There's tears, there's, you know, one of the biggest indicators of how powerful the film is for people is we have to wrap up our Q&As. They're not, you know, normally you have to plant someone in an audience for a Q&A and, you know, you wind it up pretty quickly. We have to actually stop ours because it just would go on and on and on. And people, as the confidence grows in people asking questions and then realizing that the responses from us is always going to be positive no matter what, because that's what we're about. And unifying people just keep asking more and more questions, and that carries on that emotion, and it also deepens that unity that they felt in the room. So it's quite extraordinary, really.
It's so beautiful to hear. I'm thrilled that it's getting that kind of response. Before we start, you know, going into this film and discussing it, which I'm really looking forward to, I do want to go back a bit and get to know you a little bit more. That's something that I do with this podcast. And you were born and raised in Alice Springs, is that right?
Yeah, I was. I've come and gone a lot between Adelaide and Alice Springs, but Alice is certainly home. And in fact, I'm third generation Alice Springs.
Wow.
So, yeah, not as old as the original people from Alice Springs by a long time.
That's right. For city folk like myself, we only ever see Alice Springs portrayed in film and television or on the 6 o'clock news, which isn't always in the most positive light. What's Alice Springs like from a local's perspective? Can you paint a picture for us?
Look, I think that depends on the local, but for me, Alice Springs is the most extraordinary place in the world to live. It's this incredible community, and we're all in the middle of the country. We're all 1,500 kilometres from a city, at least. And a lot of us have moved away. Not me, I was lucky, but many other people, they take the big journey to move to Alice Springs and they leave everything familiar to them and their families behind. And so they create new families in Alice. which are community-based. And so there's a real bond between people in Alice, and the tentacles of Alice go far and wide because of the fact that our origins are from all over the place. And that's not only nationally, but internationally. A lot of immigrants come to live in Alice because there's a very high, there's a lot of jobs available. And so when they first come to settle in Australia, the government sends them to regional places as part of getting visas. And a lot of those people, they never leave because they fall in love with the place. So we have big cultural diversity, not only nationally, but internationally, and this extraordinary community. And we also have the media fueling a lot of fear in the town. And so a lot of people that weren't previously scared are now scared. But I don't feel scared at all living there, and I never have. And in fact, I said to you that I come and go from Adelaide. I feel safer in Alice Springs than I do in Adelaide. I wouldn't walk around Adelaide at night by myself, and I wouldn't walk around Alice Springs late at night by myself. I wouldn't walk around anywhere late at night by myself. And mostly that's because I'm a woman.
Yes.
And so those issues, happen all over the world. But deeper than that, if I answer the door in Adelaide late at night, I would be scared.
Yes.
Because I would know that on the other side, that person probably had, it was either an emergency or they had sinister intentions, and those sinister intentions, are quite ruthless. Whereas in Alice Springs, it's very different. I just don't feel that same way. There's crime in Alice, there's youth crime in Alice, but it's opportunistic youth crime. It's smashing windows, smashing car windows, people knocking on my door asking for change, not wanting to kill me.
Yes, yeah.
And and I think that the perspective that has been lost in this fear-mongering is that 97% of Alice Springs residents, no matter what your cultural background, are crime-free. So 3% of the population is all that is committing crime in Alice. So 97% of people living there are really good people, and beyond good, they're extraordinary people, this extraordinary community.
Well, you've certainly painted it in a different light to what we see on the 6 o'clock news, which is exactly what I wanted to hear from you. That's terrific. What's it like as far as education and creativity goes growing up there?
Well, I mean, there's incredible opportunities education-wise, because if you show any initiative or promise in Alice Springs, there's a lot of support. And so education-wise, you don't suffer at all. And in terms of creativity, I think recently I saw in some media report that we were named as the most creative regional location in the whole of Australia. And I'd honestly believe it.
Wow.
We have an extraordinarily creative community, and that's a big reason behind this film.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to discussing how the community became involved in this film, because it sounds like quite an interesting story. But you began your professional career as a lawyer. What drew you to that field originally?
My dad, really. My dad, I actually always wanted to do creative arts. So I had aspirations as a kid growing up of being an actor. And my dad was just fiercely opposed to it, kept telling me that I would end up serving French fries in McDonald's if I did that.
Wow.
And put the fear, speaking of fear-mongering, into me about that career decision. And he'd studied law, and he didn't actually even finish. I think he did 5 years because he failed 1 year, and still didn't finish because he had a fight with his lecturer that took him for 3 subjects in his final year, and he dropped out.
Wow.
And went and worked for the government instead. And so, maybe it was part of, his failed dream that he wanted to live through me. But I ended up studying law, I think, partly to prove him wrong about something. I don't really know. You know, these relationships are complicated between parents and children, but I ended up, 22 years old as a lawyer because I finished school at 16, went straight into study and came out the other side. And, that's pretty serious boots to fill when you're 22 years old and you've got people's lives literally in your hands. And, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I felt that it was full of stuffy people and very conservative people with conservative views. And my mind has always been out of the box. And so I really, really hated it. And I decided I went and worked for the Australian Red Cross in international humanitarian law, which wasn't a legal position, but it was educating people about the laws of armed conflict. And I really enjoyed that, but it was only part-time. And I just really had no idea what I was going to do. I thought, oh my God, I've gone and done something here and it's not actually who I am. So I went and I traveled with the people that I was living with at the time overseas to Europe. I thought, I'll just go and travel overseas. And I can't really explain anything other than that I had a dream when I was over there, and I woke up from the dream and I can still remember it so vividly. And I just had this idea in my head that I wanted to work for Aboriginal Legal Aid, even though I had never even stepped foot in Aboriginal Legal Aid in Alice Springs. And I had absolutely no previous desire to. And so I sent my dad an email telling him that that's what I wanted to do. And when I returned, because back then we used to email, it wasn't, there was no international texting.
Yes.
So we'd go into an email cafe and Dad and I would, because we were very close, even though, I've just told you that story. We were very close.
Yes.
And I emailed him and said, I think I want to do this. I think this is the only thing that makes sense to me out of studying law. And he emailed me back and said that he knew someone and that worked there. And so he would have a talk to them and see if, he could get me an interview. Anyway, I got that interview and I gave my previous boss as the referee. And that was a bad idea because my previous boss said all these terrible things about me because I had not a great experience with him, but I thought he'd do the right thing and give a good reference for me, but he didn't. And so the person that Dad had lined me up the interview with rang me and said, look, that was a terrible idea and we were really considering not giving you a job, but we're going to give you a 2-week trial. Don't ever use that referee again.
Yes.
And I never looked back. After that, I found a purpose, I guess, and I found a place that I felt at home, more normal and more like I belonged than I did ever in my life working with the people at Aboriginal Legal Aid. Yep.
Tell us about your short documentary Bush Law and how that came about.
So that was all hatching from that. So, I was this young, naive lawyer, fast forward, and I was now 25. And, we had this revolving door of people that were going, at the time we had mandatory sentencing in the Northern Territory, and we were constantly representing people for things like driving disqualified, which is, in the minds of people living in the bush, it's not different to driving without a license. If you're sober and you drive but you don't have a license, it's hard to conceptually understand the difference between driving disqualified and driving without a license, particularly when there's no cultural translation for it. And but people are going to jail for it. So what happens with drive disqualified is you get done for driving under the influence, and that doesn't have to be even heavily under the influence. And then you get disqualified. And if you are at all caught in that period of disqualification, doesn't matter if you're completely sober, it doesn't matter if you were acting under cultural obligation, you will go to jail back then. And so I was, I watched this over and over again, people going to jail. And, I watched people getting in trouble for the same thing over and over again a lot of the time. And in my naive mind, I thought, I need to make some educational films that will explain Australian law to Aboriginal people living in remote central Australia about all these concepts in a way that is culturally relatable. And it was very, very naive of me to think that way, but that's the way I'd been raised, and that's the way that we are raised in Australia. We're raised to think that, you know, there is only one set of laws and we are the superior race. It's all unconscious, but we are raised that way. And so it's about, you know, of course, it's just about me teaching them. So I went out to a community called Largemanu who had become a very good friend of mine, Maxine Carlton, who's an Aboriginal woman who lives in Alice Springs, and she's still my friend all these years later. And we just, you know, we thought this would be a good community to make an educational documentary. So we were talking to the elders about it, and they opened the cupboard and they said to me, you know, you can make that film and it can join all these others in the cupboard. And there was this big stack of DVDs in the cupboard. And they said it'll do nothing. But what actually needs to happen is that people need to stop telling us and start listening to us and understand that for Aboriginal people living in remote Northern Territory, that the law that's dominant and the law that people grow up learning much more about and living by is Aboriginal law. And so we want you to make a movie about that. We want you to try and explain to everyday Australian people about our law. So I looked at Maxine, she looked at me, and, you know, there wasn't even a moment of hesitation in me. And a penny dropped, or a 5-cent coin, or whatever it is, say in Australia. And I realised how naive I'd been. And of course, that was a huge key to turning things around for our relationships, for our legal system, for people's compliance with the law, was that it was time for me to learn about Aboriginal law and time for me to try and become some sort of conduit or bridge between our legal worlds. And maybe that's why I'd had that dream. Maybe that's why I, you know, wanted to work in this area. So I went on the journey of making that documentary, and they wouldn't let me make, these old men wouldn't let me make the film for 2 years. I had to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and learn a lot of things before we shot the film. Wow. So for 2 years, I went back and forth to Largemanu, which for people listening is about 11 hours, mostly on corrugated dirt roads. So Maxine and I did a lot of travel over those next 2 years, and I learned things that I had never learned in 12 years of schooling and 5 years of university.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I learned more than anyone else in that, and realised how little I know, and how little I know to this day. But what resulted was this documentary, and I made that on a shoestring budget, because no one really understood what I was trying to do, and I was white, and so there's politics around that. But I was just the conduit. It wasn't my film, if that makes sense. You know, like I was just being the avenue for these people to tell their own story.
Yeah. Well, what was your education into filmmaking? Had you had any?
No.
Nothing.
Nothing. No. And it was just, you know, literally fly by the seat of my pants, and really just being authentic. You know, that's who I am as a filmmaker. I have no interest in telling stories that aren't real, that aren't authentic. Even when I make a feature film that is not a documentary, as we've done now, I have only an interest in providing opportunities for people to tell their own stories, without whitewashing it, without skewing it to the market, because this is the, you know, as I went along that journey with the documentary and as I went along the journey with Under Streetlights, you've got all these industry people saying, who's your target audience and, what will sell and what won't sell and how you're supposed to skew it towards all that. And I thought, well, that for me completely defeats the purpose. I'm not going to make the product to skew towards something that sells. I'm going to make something because people want their story to be told, and I'm not going to compromise that story for the sake of anything, because I just want to be able to give them the platform to be able to speak honestly, openly and freely without someone trying to manipulate it in any way.
Yeah.
For an agenda.
I know that we'll have a lot of listeners hearing you say that who will be agreeing with every word that you've just said then. I've spoken to a lot of filmmakers who share that sentiment. Before I do move into Under Streetlights, I've got one more question here. But you worked as a locations manager for TV shows like Pine Gap and 8MMM Aboriginal Radio, and you also worked in the casting department for Kim Farrant's Strangerland, which starred Nicole Kidman and Hugo Weaving. How did that opportunity come about? Because that film was a pretty big deal at the time.
So when I made this film on a budget of $33,000 bush law, because I did the same thing that I'm doing now, just avoiding having people get involved and trying to change that story in any way. The film isn't amazing. It's pretty rough and raw, but it struck a chord because it was the first time that a film had attempted to explain some aspects and some pretty intricate aspects of Aboriginal law. So it ended up winning several awards, and it ended up going on ABC, BBC, and it was featured in a BBC World series.
Wow.
And then it went on Al Jazeera, and then Margaret Pomeranz gave it an award for Best Human Rights Documentary.
Awesome.
And so, which was, it blew me out of the water. But it really is a testament to these men and not me, because all it is just literally them telling their own story so powerfully.
Yes.
And no one interfering with that. And so Rachel Clements, who is an incredible filmmaker who was living in Alice Springs at the time, she's since moved, but she spent a lot of years in Alice Springs, and she's made some of the best TV that's come out of Alice Springs. She called me out of the blue and said, congratulations on your film. Would you like to come and work with me? And, we go back to the conversation that I've just had with you about my relationship with the law. And it's very, very frustrating, the law, because it doesn't actually serve many people. It doesn't help many people. It's a bit like filmmaking, there's so much red tape, and it's such a long process for anybody to achieve justice. And I had already tasted this tiny bit of how powerful film can be.
Yes.
In achieving something for someone, in giving them a voice, much more powerful than the law. And so when she rang me and she said, do you want to come and work with me? I'm going to apply for Screen Australia slate funding. Would you like to come and work for me as an emerging producer? I said, let me think about that. And 1 second later, I said yes. So, and it was only part-time, it was limited funding. So it was $25 an hour. So it was, life was pretty tight. You don't get much at Aboriginal Legal Aid anyway. I've never made much as a lawyer because I've only ever worked in roles like that. But I worked part-time for Rachel. She's an extraordinary woman, and I cut my teeth with her. She taught me a lot. And I fell into roles because there's a lot of films shot in Alice Springs. Lots of people come and they want to tell stories about the region because it's, such an unusual place, and it's got beautiful landscapes. So people would contact her, and then she would put my name up to them. I worked as location manager for, my legal background helps with that because of all the contracts. And
of course.
So I worked for her on several of her TV shows. I did 8MMM Radio, which was a comedy series for the ABC, and I was the location manager for that. So I had a bit of background by the time she put me up for some other roles, and so it just kind of organically happened. But that leads me into the next part of the journey, which was working in all these shows. And I worked in lots of shows because there are lots of shows that are and films that are shot there. As I watched 95% of the people come from outside of Alice Springs. And I watched scripts being written by people not from Alice Springs.
Yes.
That missed the mark and didn't really resonate with audiences. But that's because people could feel that there wasn't a deep connection, that they were being written, I guess, for entertainment, what would sell.
Yes.
And, and then we've got the backdrop of the media that we talked about when we first started talking, and negative narrative around Alice Springs. And just the combination of all that really frustrated me because, there is this extraordinarily creative group of people in Alice Springs. They were getting not many roles. People were coming in outside, utilising local knowledge, local talent, and then taking all the credit. And it was really the catalyst for the next chapter, which is this film. I thought, all right, I've had enough of this. I want to give local people an opportunity to be thrown in the deep end in these roles, which they're never going to get unless they actually get runs on the board. That's the irony cycle there, that unless you've got the experience, you don't get the experience.
That's right.
So I thought, well, I'm going to create the experience for them. And I think that they can do this because I watched them in supporting roles to all the people that came in, and I watched them have more knowledge and understanding of the region and the nuances of the region that would make for fantastic films from Central Australia than the people that came in, despite their 20 years of experience.
Yes.
And I thought, I reckon local people can do something here that hasn't been done, and that is tell an authentic story about this place. And to add to that, there have been authentic stories told about the place, but they're steeped in the terrible history, and I don't deny there is one. So there's been local filmmakers who've made films about some of the tragedies in the region, but I've never seen anyone make a film about the incredible things about the region that's authentic.
Yes.
So that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, and you have made something really beautiful here and something that does feel authentic. So let's move into chatting about the film. The film's logline tells us that Under Streetlights is based on true events. Can you tell us how the story of this film came about and those true events that you've incorporated into it?
Yeah, so when I arrived at this decision to do this 100% local thing, I thought, well, I'm going to need to run workshops first, and I'm going to need to get in mentors because people are going to need to know a little bit of what they're doing before they step into these roles. And some of the people involved have never even had one day on the job in a relevant role.
Yes.
So I started running workshops in all aspects of filmmaking and music and acting and all the technical roles in filmmaking. And I thought, I'll see who's out there and see who's interested. And I brought in different people to run those workshops. I got a little bit of funding through sponsorship to do that. And during the course of the workshops, you get to know people and people get to know each other, and people interact with each other that might not ever have interacted with each other before. And stories about their own lives begin to surface. So the Inspired by True Stories is a combination of my own stories growing up in the region, and then the stories of other people who were involved in these workshops, and then it went to a deeper level as we were actually filming. The script is just a blueprint, really. I wrote script and it's a blueprint, and on a lot of days of shooting that got thrown out the window because the locals would say to me, that's not how I'd say that.
Yeah.
And I'd say, well, how would you say it? And in that process, more information about their own connection to the story, more information about the resonance between their lives and their on-screen character lives came to light.
Yeah.
And so the script became more and more blurred between fiction and reality as we went along, and they actively asked for more of their lives to be intertwined in the script.
You can
So
certainly feel that as a viewer, you can feel that coming through.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like as soon as the irony of people say, oh, I had no idea that they were non-actors.
Yeah.
And I say, well, the thing is that is the minute that they started acting was when I would pull them up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, now you're pretending.
Yes. Yeah.
And then we'd stop and we'd workshop a moment in their own lives that connected with this moment in the script. And they would go back to that place. And then, you know, because words are just words, aren't they? You know, often words, we say one thing and we're thinking another. So it's all about, for me as a filmmaker, it's about the emotion. Don't worry about the words, because I can say a word, and if I've got a completely different emotion, that word will come out completely differently to had I had another emotion. So the words were just words. It was what they were feeling. That was always, it was mood over plot completely the whole time.
You're listening to the Cinema Australia podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or at cinemaaustralia.com.au.
It would be easy to anticipate this film becoming a romantic relationship drama between the two main characters, especially if you go by the trailer and even the poster, but it never really falls into that genre. Were you determined from the outset not to do that?
I was. And really I was, because, you know, the characters that I was working with as well, that was the nature of all of our relationships. You know, we went to such deep places with each other, but they were platonic.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's something so incredible in a relationship that doesn't get convoluted or complicated by sexuality. So, you know, there's chemistry, incredible chemistry between our two characters.
Yeah.
But it's a pure, beautiful, not that sexuality is impure, but it's just uncomplicated when I say pure.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's really driven by their connection through shared experiences, through the common ground, and through music.
This universal language of music, it's imperative to this film's narrative, and it's one of the reasons the film works so well. We will get into talking about writing the actual songs, but from a script writing perspective, how did you go about incorporating that into the script? Was it a matter of, you know, writing insert song here, or what did you do there?
Not at all. It was the same as the film, completely organic.
Yeah.
So no one was told what songs to write. No one was told where the songs would go. I had a blueprint.
Yeah.
But, you know, the songs evolved as the relationships evolved. And in real life, Jacob Harvey, who's our lead male, and Madison Hull, who's our lead female, are aspiring musicians.
Yeah.
So they're aspiring musicians not only from vastly different cultural backgrounds and social backgrounds, but they're also from vastly different musical backgrounds. Jacob is hip hop. He's dabbled in, or not even dabbled. His background crosses between rap and trap and hip hop and some R&B. And Madison's like a folk pop songwriter, and she's just acoustic. So as they met in real life and they began to collaborate musically, we just followed that journey of exploring each other's musical genres, and then them beginning to merge and meld and create a fusion of music. So that's what the story does. The story very much emotionally reflects in the music what is happening in reality for the two characters, both in real life and on screen. So the music is its own character, and it's the driving force really for the entire movie and the entire process. And I found out, and it certainly wasn't by any design, that we're the first film of this subgenre to come out of Australia. So someone explained to me, and this is my ignorance, I don't pretend to be some established filmmaker. I don't know the rules, and which is great because you don't know the rules, you don't know you're breaking them. And I think, to be honest, the rules are all over the place now. The film industry is in a completely new place with the advent of social media and all these bedroom filmmakers who are doing way better than established and long-term filmmakers. It's throwing the whole industry on its head, YouTube, etc. So I didn't know that the difference, my ignorance is that I didn't know the difference between a musical and a musical drama feature film. So someone explained to me not long ago that reviewed us that, no, you're a musical drama, you're not a musical. So there's been a musical that's come out of Australia, but there hasn't been a musical drama. And I said, I don't really understand the difference. And they were like, well, if you think about the movies like The Commitments, where music is driving the story, but it's not a musical as such. They don't jump out of their character and become musical.
Yeah, singing and dancing down the street.
That's right. They are, the music is part of the narrative, literally part of the story and the evolving narrative.
Yeah.
So I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Yes. And, you really did capture lightning in a bottle here with the casting of Madison Hull and Jacob Harvey. When did you know you had the right to play the roles of Ella and Izak?
That's so crazy that you just said that, because that's exactly what an audience member said to me the other night. Lightning in a bottle. And I'd never heard that phrase before.
Wow.
So you're the second person. And when did I realize? Well, again, it's about breaking rules and it's about breaking stereotypes. This film's all about both of those things. I had other people audition for the role of Izak, and I had a lot of people saying to me that I shouldn't have Jacob, because people wanted to have, that classically, that stereotypical image of a male lead, I guess.
Yeah.
Hip hop idol. And so there was other people that might have, looked more of that part. And I whatever that look is and whatever that part is, because I don't subscribe to any of that stuff. But, I had a lot of people that were more experienced than me saying that I was making a mistake. But I just knew from the very moment I met Jacob that he was someone extraordinary. And our story, he was there from the beginning. He was there from the very beginning of the workshops that I ran. And our story is incredible, the bond that we have and the history that we have. And there was never a doubt in my mind, really.
Yeah, and that's so interesting that you said that, because not once during the watching of this film did I ever think that he wasn't right to play this role because, of stereotypes and things like that. He's an extremely talented actor. He's an incredible singer. He's perfect.
He's absolutely perfect, and he's beautiful in every way, inside and out. And I think he's extraordinarily handsome and all of those things that people say, the Hollywood hunk heroes. I think he's all of that as well.
Yes, that smile.
But he's also really relatable. He's not putting himself out there to make everybody else feel like they're inferior because they don't have a six-pack and they don't, they're not chiseled and they're not this and they're not that. I think he's deeply relatable for the fact that he's a real person. But what you see on screen, that smile, that's real. That's who he is. He's a person of incredible depth. And he's a person that's been through a lot in his life, and it's not in spite of it, it's because of it that he brings so much to his character and to the story. And, much of the story is inspired by Jacob's real life. And the Streetlights song, that's our theme song in the movie, was written by Jacob. And, it's him reflecting on his life as a child, and particularly a night where he had to sleep under a streetlight in a public park
Mm.
because of a poverty situation. And the song's his commitment to never go back to that place.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you
And
know, I could never have gone with anyone else.
No, and it's such a terrific song. There are two other characters in this film that I want to talk about, and that's Clifford, played by Leighton Mason, and Jack, played by Luke Scholes.
Yep.
I want to say, yeah. As a father myself, I was really drawn to their stories within this film. And when you think about it, even though they're culturally different, they really are the same person. They're both parents. They've both lost their wives in some aspect, and they're both fighting their own demons. Leighton is credited as a cultural director here. Did he have a hand in development of these two characters?
He didn't have a hand in the development of the concept,
Mm.
but he had very much a hand in the development of his story.
Yeah.
And making sure that from an Indigenous perspective, we were representing everything accurately and authentically. And we weren't straying into any territory that would offend anyone in any way. He was, and so he was absolutely integral, as was Lynette Ellis, who played Auntie Samara in the film.
Yes.
They were both vital. And this is the thing, when you go down the funding path, which we never did. This is not a case of we applied for funding and we didn't get it. We just never went down the funding path as a deliberate measure.
Yeah.
But when you do, and you make content that has Indigenous aspects to it, they'll assign someone from somewhere else. And it's like putting someone from Germany into a film about Spain.
That's right, yeah.
There's all these different places. And so these were two local people. And they knew much more. It doesn't matter that they weren't filmmakers historically. If you're going to be advised by someone on Aboriginal culture in filmmaking, you need to be advised by people that are living that particular cultural construct. So those two were absolutely integral to this story, accurately and authentically representing the Indigenous side of the storytelling. So Leighton was pivotal to the development of his character and the way his character related to every other character in the film.
Would you agree with what I said there about these two effectively being the same person?
You hit the nail on the head, and that's why they were written the way they were written, because this film is all about stereotypes.
Yeah.
This film is all about the fact that we might not even be aware of it, but it's in our DNA growing up. All of us, every human, we grow up and we have unconscious perceptions that we are born into, and they are fostered even further by the influences in our childhood. And we're not even conscious of them a lot of the time. So as a person who'd grown up in Alice Springs and had a history of heavy drinking in my family, and my family's white, and I was surrounded by alcoholics growing up who didn't know they were even alcoholics, because culturally and socially they had adopted all the narrative that comes around drinking in Australia, of I drink to celebrate, I drink to nurse my pain, my grief, I drink to socialize, all these occasions that we drink to, and all of these emotions that we drink to, and we get drunk, but we're not alcoholics because we might give up for 28 days a year for sober November. So we're not an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And it took me until I was really sick. I got really bad whooping cough in my 30s to realize I was coming out of the doctor, and I saw this guy who was completely mad. And I mean, like mad, like crazy hair, didn't change his clothes, but he was a friend of mine. I've always felt like an outsider myself, and I've always related and resonated with the fringes of society because I feel more accepted. And so I met this guy. He was a brother of someone that I knew, and he would wander around Alice Springs, and he would come over and visit me, and I would just always give him the time of day, and because he would always give me the time of the day and accept me unconditionally. But he was, what we call mad as a hatter. But then I was coming out of the doctor's, and he had, like, his hair was all brushed, and he always had these beautiful blue eyes, but they were crystal clear. And he walked up to me, and I was feeling like absolute shit. And he said, "Hey, Danny." And I said, "Rolly, what are you doing?" And I said, "You look really different." And he said, "I've given up the grog."
Wow.
And I just couldn't, in that moment, I was like, oh my God, alcohol, the difference that no alcohol, I could just see it.
Yeah.
He was clear, he was rational, he was dressed well, he said, "I've found AA, I'm going to AA." And I just found myself saying, "I'm just like you." I just, in our conversation, it just came tumbling out. And he said, "Well, you should come to AA with me." And I just said, okay.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, I was in AA and on a long journey of realizing that I'd been an alcoholic for most of my life.
Wow.
And you marry that with growing up in Alice Springs, where I had a lot of Aboriginal friends, and they were friends that I spent more time with than most other people. And they would send me into the bottle shop because they would get a hard time at the bottle shop. But I was the bigger drunk by far. And, and then you add that to the fact that most of my Aboriginal friends back then and to this day don't even drink.
Yeah.
And all of my white friends did.
Yes. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And so, all that swimming around in my head hatched these two characters, because and even throughout the course of making this film, as I was developing this film and I was getting feedback from people, who said to me, "Well, Jack's just a grieving father and Clifford's an alcoholic." They would say that to me. And I would see red. I was like, what? Clifford's grieving the loss of his wife too.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jack's the worst alcoholic.
Yeah.
And it just made me even more committed to tell this story.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, the stereotypes that form in our heads that we're not even conscious of make us stereotype an entire race of people as drunks, and justify an entire other race of people as being people who celebrate or grieve or party or even are heroes because they can drink more than anyone else at the table and still be standing. And I just, it blows my head off, because it's that narrative that was in my own life that stole so much of my own life. But it also hurt so many of my friends and people that I don't know from the Aboriginal culture who are perceived and labelled as a drunk, and nearly killed other people. So going back to Clifford, so Leighton Mason in real life had stage 4 cancer.
Yes.
He was given a diagnosis of terminal, 3 months to live, 6 months before he came into the film.
Yeah.
And for 8 months, he'd been going back and forth to Alice Springs Hospital with this incredible pain in his mouth. And he's a very intuitive person. He knew he had cancer. But because he was actively drinking, and he was drinking a lot, the hospital just kept writing him off as an Aboriginal drunk and telling him he had an abscess in his mouth. So by the time the abscess was a golf ball in size, he had just had enough. He was the pressure that he describes in his mouth of that golf ball, which was actually a tumor, and the pressure in his head and the pain, he just lost it one night at the hospital. He just, I wasn't there, but he would describe like he just got really upset because no one would test him for cancer and no one would take him seriously. And because of that behaviour and because of the fact that he was an Aboriginal man who was drinking, the security were called and he was dragged and completely humiliated and physically hurt, and then locked up in Ward 1, which is our mental health ward, and jabbed with intramuscular drugs that make you render you unable to, hurt anyone, because that's what they think that he was going to do, because of their stereotyping. And so, he was kind of like not even able to really speak by the time that all happened. And then he was assigned a psychologist, and the psychologist went in to see him and said, "What's going on?" And he said, "I've got cancer." And I went off because no one's taking me seriously. And she said, "Well, has anyone tested you for cancer? Has anyone done a biopsy?" And he said, "No, and that's all I've been asking for this whole time." And so she couldn't believe it. And she straight away got the doctors to order the biopsy. And within 48 hours, he was on a plane to Darwin having to have treatment for stage 4 mouth cancer.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that, makes me so driven with this film.
Yeah. I'm really glad that I asked you that question about those two characters, because I had a feeling that there was a bit more behind them than what we see on the screen.
Spot on. Absolutely spot on. And it's a deliberate timeline placement as well. So people feel really uncomfortable in the first 20 minutes of the film. In fact, people in feedback stage stopped watching the film because they thought, ironically, that I was stereotyping Aboriginal people.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So they stopped watching and they were like, "Oh, this disgusting woman is stereotyping Aboriginal people." But I do that on purpose, because what I want to do is bring up all of your unconscious bias. I want to bring up all your uncomfortability. And then I want to flip the switch so that you then are introduced to Jack.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that you go on your own journey as a viewer of this film of realizing things about what comes up in you. And so I want you to feel that uncomfortable before you're introduced to Jack.
Yeah, amazing. Incredible work on that one. I've got a new segment that I've introduced to this podcast, excuse me, where I get a filmmaker to talk us through a particular scene. And there's a beautiful scene in the film that I'd love you to talk us through. And I hope viewers are as moved by this scene as I was. And it's the scene in the film where Izak hears Ella singing for the first time. They're sitting on a rock face and they're looking out over the town. It was as if they were announcing themselves to the world, really. That's the feeling that I got. And I'm not a spiritual person at all, but it felt spiritual, if that makes sense. Can you talk us through that scene from a technical and emotional perspective?
Yeah, well, Ella is grieving the death of her mum in the film. Her mum's recently passed away, and her mum was really the only person in the world that got her. Her mum and her are quite retro characters, both lovers of vintage, both quirky. And her mum died, and she's alone with a police officer father who is struggling with alcoholism, and was definitely struggling with alcoholism long before mum died, and is emotionally absent and always has been from her life. So he's doing the best that he can, but it's not a very good job of parenting her. And so she's very alone and very isolated, and she meets Izak at the wake for her mum's funeral, because she hears him playing a song while he's on a break from work to his workmate that he's been working on, and she follows the sound of that song, and then she goes looking for him because he won't let her listen to the song because he's embarrassed because it's not finished. He doesn't show people his songs until they're finished, let alone this strange white girl. And so that moment on the hill is really spiritual. They're in one of the most beautiful spiritual places in Alice Springs. They're on the top of the world, literally on top of a mountain. And, Izak says to her, "No one can hear you up here," because she's never sung in front of anyone in her life. She's never sung in public. She's only ever written in her bedroom. She writes songs. She's always written songs, but she's really thrown herself into her songwriting as a way to express herself about how she feels losing her mum. So her songs are about her mother's death and grieving her mother's death. So they're very deeply personal and very deeply spiritual. And so it's this huge vulnerability in her and this trust that's building between them for her to sing to Izak. And it's his insight into that vulnerability and his seeing her for who she really is and hearing her that encourages her to feel safe enough to sing to him.
Mm.
And it's a very special moment in the film. So thanks for pointing that one out.
What about from a technical perspective, shooting on those rocks? Did it go well? Were there many takes?
No, it went really well. I mean, it's kind of a plateau up there.
Yeah.
So they're perched on the edge, but it's quite flat behind them.
Right.
So we were able to shoot from behind and from the side. And then Andre, our cinematographer, also shot from below and got some takes of them talking from that angle.
Yes, yeah.
And it's a combination of those things. So it wasn't particularly dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it is a plateau up there. I mean, there's snakes and rocks and there's a cliff face, but for us Alice locals, it's pretty safe.
Yes,
It's pretty familiar. If you're a kid who hasn't walked up those steps and hung out there with your school friend, then you've been hiding under a rock yourself.
Right. Okay.
Every kid does that,
Yes,
which is why it's in the movie.
Yeah. Wonderful. Before we wrap up here, I want to ask you about the soundtrack, which obviously plays a huge part in the film. How is the release of that soundtrack going to coincide with the release of the film? Is it something audiences will be able to enjoy at the same time? Or what's happening there?
Absolutely. So we've released 2 singles already from the soundtrack, and they are available on all streaming services. We've released the first song, Take a Chance, and that's a song that is written by Madison Hull and our music producer, Kane Gilmore, and sung by Madison Hull, playing the lead role of Ella. And it's about her reflecting on what we just touched on and what deepens as the story goes. Her friendship with Izak and what he means to her. And it's about taking chances with trusting people and letting people into your lives that you might not ever have otherwise let in because of all of these stereotypes and unconscious bias and things that keep us apart. And so it's a really beautiful film. It's acoustic. It's very much in reflection of her in real life. And then the second song that we've released is, of course, our incredible theme song written by Jacob Harvey, Streetlights. And then the third song we're about to release next week is In My Dreams, which is written by another local, Becky Weir, and performed by Madison Hull. And then we're releasing the soundtrack in the week of our national release. So our national release, even though we're doing all these advanced screenings around with Q&As, we're not officially releasing until the 12th of December. And soundtrack will be released on the 9th to coincide with that, so that we can then tell everyone at our red carpet opening event at the Hayden Orpheum in Sydney to go and download the soundtrack now.
Yeah. And they are very catchy songs, and I think everyone's going to enjoy them. I've been lucky enough to receive the soundtrack as part of the press kit, so I've been listening to it during the weekend, and I listened to it before this interview to prepare for it as well. I hope audiences enjoy it as much as I did. One final question here that I have for you: would you say that this experience has fueled you as a filmmaker now, or are you keen to jump into your next project?
Absolutely. But we've got a lot of work to do on this one first, because this is so much more than a film. It's a movement. It's we want to spark a new conversation. And this film is not limited to the literal subject matter of black and white. This is about the common ground in humanity. In a world that is so polarized, we are being polarized and manipulated by media and people with agendas all over the planet to divide over difference. We are being sent to war literally, or sent to war online over difference, when difference shouldn't be a reason to divide. Difference is a reason for inspiration. It's a reason for creativity. It's a reason for celebration, but it certainly doesn't need to divide us. We've got so much more in common as human beings than we do in difference. And so that's what this film is about. It's about exploring that. So it was never about becoming a filmmaker and becoming famous for making a film. It was about sparking a conversation so that these incredible people that have told bravely their stories of finding common ground and exploring that together can share that with the rest of Australia and hopefully even beyond Australia, and flip the narrative that this world's going on at the moment. Like, stop being divided. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what sexual orientation you are. It doesn't matter what religious belief you are. It doesn't matter what difference you have. So this is, it's not limited to black and white. It's anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, those things can proudly define us, but they just don't need to divide us anymore. We, as a human race, have to get our shit together on this and come together and walk together. Otherwise, we're in big trouble, because we are a big melting pot of people now, But it's not just that we're in big trouble. It's that my life's never, ever going to be the same. My life is a million, trillion, zillion times better because I met this group of people who are so different to me in so many different ways. We're all so different from each other in age, in background, not just in colour, in every way. And all of our lives, I don't just speak for myself. If you interviewed any of them, they would say the same thing. Our lives have been so enriched by getting to know each other and by exploring our common ground. And then in that safe space of trust that's created in the common ground, beginning to explore the differences between us, but in a intriguing and respectful way rather than a fear-mongering way.
Yeah. Very well said there, Danielle. And it's a perfect way to wrap up this interview. I can't thank you enough for joining the Cinema Australia podcast and sharing your stories with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to them. So thank you again.
I can't thank you enough for completely understanding this film. And I hope that everyone else who watches it has the same level of understanding that you have just shown me in all of the questions that you've asked. So thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Find all the latest Australian film news at cinemaaustralia.com.au. You can follow Cinema Australia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok.